Hi, Howard. Welcome to Funnel Vision Podcast. Excited to have you on today to share your tips and tricks and sales advice with our community of sales professionals.
Well, Elena, thanks so much for the invite, and I'm excited to have the conversation. So thanks again.
Yeah, no problem. So, first question, what is one game-changing tactic that you rely on to build strong client relationships?
Elena, that's a really good question. And I think, what I hear from my clients is really a combination of two things. So one is responsiveness with a sense of urgency, and then being transparent about what your deliverables are going to be and being on time with those deliverables. And I'll just share, as it relates to the first one, is that in this day and age when everyone has phones and access to the internet, a lot of times when emails are sent or even texts are sent, making sure that your client or prospective clients know that you received it. Most people aren't looking for an immediate answer, but unfortunately, when things are sent and if there's no response, immediately the mind goes to not interested or you can't help me, and that individual has always moved on. And I believe there are studies out there too that also show that when prospects do inquire about your services or want to learn more, that the first to reply or the close to first to reply traditionally has a much higher percentage of winning that business down the road. So sense of urgency and responsiveness, I think, are two things that really help at the outset to start to build a strong relationship. But I think you then follow up that with whatever deliverables that you're promised in your statement of work, that you get them done in a timely and accurate way that drives value for the client.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. And again, it's so many times we have this conversation and I ask this question and it is the really truly like basics that are so important in sales is doing the things that you say that you're going to do, right? Like when somebody needs something, you're going to reply in a timely manner and, kind of have that's where you begin to form that bond of of trust and that relationship. Yeah, kind of leaving people and not responding even if you're you got the email and you're waiting to get the answer, just saying got this, I'll get back to you shortly, or whatever it is, like showing that person that you're here and you're responsive and that you understand, so important. It's so key to building that and fostering that trust and doing what you say that you're going to do.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, for me, strong client relationships is no different than any other relationships. You want to be heard, you want to be valued, and you want your time to be appreciated. And I think that anytime, whether you're working with an existing or a potential new client, if you can demonstrate in your actions and words those three things, I think you have more than a fighting chance in order to win an opportunity to earn that client's business.
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely agree with you. Howard, what's the best piece of sales advice that you've received, and how has that changed your approach to what you do?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And I think given my background, I started my career as an attorney and I litigated for 5 years before I did a 180 into sales, and then spent 25, 30 years in corporate before I decided to give back to the small and mid-sized business community. I think the one piece of advice I took to heart that really had a change in the trajectory of not only where my career went, but just my enjoyment and fulfillment was make it your own. There are probably, a million different folks out there will say that you have to do your sales process this way, or this is the methodology, or this is how you should handle a meeting. And what I found is that adults, we kind of learn in threes as we get older. And you can go through all these trainings. And what I like to talk to my clients and the sales teams I work with is if you think that you have come across something in a training or a reading or whatever that you could help you be better, put it into practice. And if it works, keep it. And if it doesn't, hit the delete button. So I always talk about make it your own. We're not looking to create robots who can do sales. we're looking to help professionals who have a passion around building relationships and solving clients' needs and problems in a way which is best for them for their professional personality. So I really took it, I took to heart, make it your own. And that really, I think looking back on my career, made a significant difference. And when I share that with folks that I'm coaching and mentoring, a little bit of a light bulb goes on and says, yeah, you know what? I've been trying to mimic what someone else has found to be successful. And I don't need to mimic it. I just need to incorporate certain aspects of that in order for me to drive forward.
And using that, it makes you yourself. It makes you more authentic in what you're
Yeah.
doing. So maybe some people are better at approaching a situation this way, or doing like using these methodologies, and like for other people it's more, like low key relationship driven, and instead of hard, like the hard sell. Like there's so many different ways to do things. Um and taking those parts that work for you, it just makes it kind of, probably makes that person come off as more authentic and likable. If you do what works for you, of course, there's all, you have to do things and sometimes go outside your comfort zone, but like finding out what does work for you and where you've been successful in the past, and then incorporating more of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Authenticity, reliability, and showing up. Those are the things that I think differentiate, folks that people want to work with versus maybe folks that people don't want to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving to like AI, obviously AI has been a huge topic lately. Like, how do you see AI in the sales world? Like, what do you see it change, how do you see it changing the future of sales, and any, tips or advice on best practices, how and where to use AI? And of course, that could be a whole other podcast,
Yeah.
on its own, but just in general,
Right.
yeah.
So I think for artificial intelligence, I think the first thing when you start to talk about it with your colleagues or potential clients or existing clients is really making sure you're defining what artificial intelligence is and why is it something that an organization should try and enable within their sales processes or with their salespeople. When I think about artificial intelligence, I think about enablement. And when I think about enablement, I think about what are those things that I always hear that get in a way for a salesperson to actually be talking to an existing client or a future client. And that's where I think these enablement technologies that we've coded artificial intelligence really come into play. Is that they allow a sales organization and a sales team member to be more effective and efficient in their communication, allows them to be more targeted and making sure that they are truly talking to their ideal client profiles and the buyer personas. And it also allows them to free up time for activities that took up a lot of precious moments in the past that don't need to be done today. So the first is like one of the key things I think that drive momentum in the sales process is not what happens during the meeting, but what happens immediately after the meeting. So if me and you are having a discovery call and we agree that you're going to do X and I'm going to do Y, within 24, if not less business hours than that, there should be a follow-up note that should be sent to you saying, hey, thanks for the call. This is the problem we've identified. Over the course of the next week, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Here are kind of the next steps. Because it gets buy-in, it gets engagement, and it gets everyone kind of focused on the right thing. And there are efficiency tools, whether you call them note takers or things that you can attach to meetings that do a couple things that in the past would take a lot of time for salespeople to do. One is to look at their notes that they were scribbling down and figure out what that email should look like so they don't have a clear sense of the 3 or 4 action items. Two, I then have to go back into the CRM and add all that documentation or attach it. Now all these things can be integrated, so I can have a conversation like this. It can quickly, after the meeting, send out a summary to myself, which I can use very quickly to have an email that's back to you, within an hour, and that might even be a little bit lengthy. That highlights the meeting and the next steps. And then it gets all embedded within the CRM. So God forbid I'm not here tomorrow and that meeting's set up. My boss or my colleague can just look in the CRM, get quickly up to speed, and be able to drive things. So that's just one example of, I think, how AI or these enablement tools can bring all these disparate tools we've used in the past together in a way that makes me more efficient and effective and allows me to do one thing, which is the most vital thing in my role as sales, have more meaningful conversations with my current clients or prospective clients.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those tools, there are so many out there now. Some better than others and all that, do different things, but you're right. It's all the time that is, you can, use those tools to save you all of the time and all of the things that are, salespeople don't love to do. And updating the CRM, like you said, and all of the notes, like, yeah, Fathom and other note takers are just, I mean, they change the game, and are just so, so helpful for, understanding meetings. And then, also in the meetings where it tells you like how much you're talking, right? Like it says like you've just talked for, 6 minutes without taking a break. But those are good like things that you can look at, to help your team understand, when to talk, when not to talk, when to listen, when, just kind of for training and improvement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And on that training and improvement, I mean, the evolution of these enablement tools to create AI assistants and the concept of creating AI agents, which is definitely a whole nother podcast that you could probably spend hours on. But at the end of the day, it's taking those activities that us as humans either don't like to do or don't do well because it requires us to go to multiple databases to pull very specific information to then consolidate into one message can now all be done through these enablement tools. I have one client that will be using an AI agent and an AI assistant that will allow it to speed up their proposal generation time from 1 to 2 weeks to less than an hour. So
Wow.
imagine the impact to a business and to a salesperson if I can get proposals out that are accurate and timely within an hour for what used to take me 1 to 2 weeks, and then those proposals are acted upon by a win or loss. I have the capability to drive, the revenue and the profitability of the company in a much more meaningful way than kind of the other ways that we have been doing business before.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. What do you think is something that a salesperson should stop doing if they want to become more successful?
Complaining. I think that's the one thing I hear from a lot of clients when I start to go in and talk to them and look at their sales organization and assess their processes and their people and how they're using technology. I think that salespeople will traditionally point to a million different things why they're not being able to sell enough. I have to do this marketing. I have to do that. And when I say complaining, it's complaining without identifying the true cause of what the problem is and what a potential solution is. So anyone can say, this is wrong with the world and stuff like that, but it just becomes a lot of noise and drama in the workplace. And for me, kind of where I'm in my career, when I go work with clients, when I'm working with founder-led or family-run businesses, those owners or leaders, they're exhausted, they're disappointed, they're discouraged. And a lot of it is because they feel like everything is on them as the leader. And what they're getting from their sales organization is just a lot of complaints. And every problem isn't really necessarily a problem. It might be something that we don't really want to deal with when we woke up in the morning, but it can also be an opportunity, right? So I think it's the lens that you look at it. So I think, that one thing that salespeople should stop doing is stop complaining about those things that are outside your control, and start having meaningful impact of those things that are in control. And I think the big example is like the tariffs, like the last 2 or 3 months, or, it's maybe only been 6 weeks. It feels maybe like 3 months where we've been talking about it. It's like, I just feel like there's salespeople and there's business owners who are now paralyzed because of the tariff issue. And what I tend to coach my clients is like, well, let's look at what the actual implications are, and let's have a best, worst, and most likely scenario outcome. And then based upon how these things change, and we're already seeing that changing, just the tariffs in China, the 90-day reprieve from 145 to maybe, into the 30 or 45% range, whatever it is now, you can just start to see that it is something that businesses need to be not frozen by, but have the capability to say, if this happens, this is what our reaction will be in order to still allow us to achieve our, revenue and profitability goals for the coming year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it does. It seems like we've been talking about tariffs for for months and months and months now. So it's interesting. Um, so moving to like recruiting and finding great salespeople, do you have any like tips or tricks or advice on how to identify, truly top performing salespeople during the interview process?
Yeah, another really relevant question, because this is where I usually come in with a lot of my client engagements. They've been burned by bad hires in the past, or the salesperson or leader has not worked out. And I think as businesses are really fine-tuned into, well, who's my ideal client? I think businesses need to say, if I'm going to hire a salesperson, what's my ideal candidate profile? What are the characteristics and traits that are going to be necessary for this person to be successful, not only in the role, but also within our culture? And what are some things that are must-haves versus nice-to-haves? I think the other part of the sales process is that I think a lot of times businesses are a little bit conservative, and they don't value their time against the cost of bringing in a recruiter whose only job is to find top performing sales talent or leadership. A lot of DIYers, do it on your own, things along those lines. It never works out. It takes too long. Most businesses, small, mid-sized, don't have a fine-tuned hiring process. And so I usually talk to my clients about finding the right recruiter for their space and then partnering with them. It does two things. It gives greater confidence to the process that you will find the right person. It also allows the business leaders to then focus on other things that can have a simultaneous impact on their business. Once you do find the recruit, I think there's a few things businesses need to do. One is you need to meet with that person at different times of the day throughout the interview process. You also need to hold them accountable for, if they're trying to sell you that they're the right person for this sales job, how they treat and act and communicate with you is most likely how they're going to treat, communicate, and act towards a prospect or a client. And one of the things that I see a huge gap today when I interview people is the lack of candidates' follow-up notes, thanking for the opportunity to have the conversation, summarizing what we talked about, why they would be a good fit, and specifically asking to be part of the next step. If you're not going to do that on a job that you want, you're not going to do that when you're in the position. And that's just the last part I like to talk to my clients is like, if you have to coach someone through them trying to get the sales job, how much time and energy are you going to have when you are coaching and mentoring the person after they're in the role? And most businesses don't have the time and energy to do that. So I say, slow down the speed up. Let's do a better job at hiring. And even if it takes you 30 or 60 days longer to find that right fit, you will be that much more empowered in your role, and that person will probably do much better in their role because you have taken your time and you found the right person.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Obviously, I agree with all that you said about recruiting and, finding a recruiter because it's especially with, smaller organizations, they even may have a recruiter on staff, but they don't necessarily have a recruiter that understands sales roles and how to identify the right sales candidates because hiring for sales is different. It's a different process. It's very different than hiring for standard, type of roles. And one of the first things that you said, I just wanted to highlight, which is because it's a huge gap for my clients, and is defining what you need and defining the role before starting the search to look for that person. It is such a key step and so important to truly define the role, what qualities you need, what experience you need, and everything else before starting the interview process and recruiting. Because how do you know what you're recruiting for? How do you know what that ideal person is going to be? And it surprisingly is a step that is skipped very often. People go, okay, I need an account executive, and they'll go into ChatGPT and say account executive job description, and they'll get something very generic and start looking for that person, but it doesn't identify the unique needs of their business, their methodologies, what kind of what supports they have in place versus what supports they don't have in place, and things like that. So it's so important to define the role and define what you're looking for before jumping into recruiting. And it's a
Yeah, and I
step
just
that
think
people miss.
I totally agree with that. And I think on the back end, when you do find your one or two top candidates, and there's a handful of tools out there, is to invest in a professional assessment.
Mm.
These assessments are not meant to rule someone in or out, but they do help in the interviewing process. And one of the things that I look for are assessment tools that will give me a measurement of their will to sell. And will to sell is something that's innate. I think it's something that people are born with. I don't think it's something you can necessarily be taught. I think there are ways in which you can improve your sales process, but the will to sell is really your ambition, what motivates you in the morning, and having an understanding on someone's professional personality traits before you go into that final interview. Do two things. One, understand right away where this person's going to excel and where they might need some coaching and mentoring down the road. And two, confirm all those things that you thought you heard during the entire process to give you confidence that, yes, this is the person we want to invest in and bring to our team.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. So Howard, tell us a little bit about your background, what you do, and where people can find you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Elena. So as I shared earlier, I have 25, 30-year career in corporate America, really from a frontline sales, individual contributor to sales management, and eventually to sales leadership, where I really developed a passion for helping businesses align their business development ecosystem. And that's really taking a look at the business strategic plan, making sure that there's a sales plan that fuels the business plan, and that there's a corresponding marketing plan that ignites the sales plan. And when I first work with clients, sometimes that's not all in place. So we do spend a little energy and effort to make sure that's in place. And then I really take a laser focus to the sales pillar, looking at processes that the company is using, the people or people they will need, and then the technology they're using to drop top line sales. So working with me as your trusted growth partner feels more like a situation where the business owner and leadership is not just looking for a band-aid approach, but is looking for a holistic solution that can help them build a sales operating system that will give them confidence year over year. It will achieve the growth they're looking for by making sure they have the right people, processes, and then use of technology. A lot of clients will retain me first to do an assessment, get a baseline, and then I become their sales consultant or vice president of sales. I help them through kind of the planning and strategy phase, build the solutions for them, hire if need, coach and mentor their salespeople they might have in place. And at some point during our relationship, they'll say, hey, it would feel really great to know what a full-time Howard would be rather than fractional, either half a day a week or a full day a week. And then I just go out and find my replacement, and then that person gets coached and mentored, and it kind of slides very easily into what I was doing and allows the organization to scale at a pace that meets their needs based upon their strategic plan. My company's name is called Hantera. I'm part of a larger community called Sales Acceleration, which is close to 300 senior vice presidents of sales across the US, Canada, and Europe. And we collaborate on best practices and allows me access to tools and productivity companies that can add value to my clients.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. And look forward to continuing our conversation soon.
Thanks, Elena. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.